Hearing voices.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
This is Hearing Voices. Conversations with the voices that bring the excitement of college sports alive.
No headphone can capture the complex bourbon and butter flavor of my actual timber.
Now, here's your host, the voice of your Fighting Tigers, Chris Blair.
Welcome in, everybody. Yeah, it's another week of Hearing Voices. Excited you could drop by and hang out with us a little bit more. Actually coming to you from the big LSU Sports Radio Network studios today. That's why you see all the wires. And that room back there has got a lot of stuff in it. Coming up, LSU now 2-1 on the season. They're going to enter SEC play coming up this Saturday, and they will go on the road to do it. And it's a familiar foe, a team that certainly shook things up for the Tigers in 2020 in the opening game of the season. We'll talk a little bit about that, but mainly we're going to talk, well, the business. We got one of the great voices of college sports, a guy that I like to consider a friend. We'll find out if he feels the same. But in June of 2017, he was named the voice of the Mississippi State Bulldogs, spent over a decade at the University of Kentucky, and as I said, he's one of the premier voices not only in the SEC, but in all of college sports, and you can check him out on the radio network. You can stream him. You can watch him on Facebook videos. There's all kinds of ways to enjoy the stylings of Neil Price. Neil, man, thanks for joining us. It's good to have you once again. I had you once on the show in 2019, and by some miracle, I get you back here again in 2021. How the heck are you?
I'm doing good, and I'm glad that at least when we get together on Saturday, we're going to get together in a place where there's going to be a lot more people, and it's going to feel a lot more like real football. That game in 2020 at Tiger Stadium, for that to be one of the iconic venues in all of college sports, to be in there with about 25,000 people, and to see LSU run out of that tunnel and the Golden Band from Tigerland spaced out down there in the corner, and they're not on the field. It was a really strange way to start the football season. So these first three games, at least from my perspective, covering the state team, have felt a lot more like the games did in 2019, and I'm awful thankful for that.
Oh, I agree with you 100%. I mean, we were thankful to have football last year. But it certainly was very different in every venue that we went to, which kind of leads me in the first topic I wanted to talk about. And you and I and all of the guys around the league had a couple of meetings, had a couple of Zoom calls leading up to last year's season, and we all kind of anticipated that we're going to be calling games remotely. Now, some of us did for football, some of us did not. Most all of us did for men's basketball, and then we kind of got back into traveling and being at the venue this past spring with baseball. You're always, and I've said this to you before, you're always a glass half full kind of guy, which I obviously admire. But your thoughts on having to do it remotely, because I know you made the best of it. Heck, we all had to make the best of it. But the difference in that and actually being at the venue, because I went on record, I hated doing them remotely. And, I was a little nervous that people would say, hey, well, that's easy to do. See, you just got all these cameras and you got all this technology, but I just don't buy it. It's just not the same. Your thoughts of doing it virtually versus being there now?
Well, I certainly can sympathize with the situation that everyone was in a season ago, because, we really didn't know what COVID-19 was. We really didn't have an idea of how, we would impact potentially the contamination of the players or the travel party. So I am thankful that in football, because we're removed from the field and we sit in a booth and all that, as long as we didn't mind traveling on our own, we were able to go to the games last year and cover the games and give our audiences the best, most accurate picture that we could. And we went to every regular season game, home and away. The only football game that we did remotely was the bowl game in Fort Worth. And the only reason we did that is because there was a basketball game, an SEC game in Athens the night before. And I didn't trust the technology to sit in a hotel room and try and do a basketball game, especially a conference game, on the road. I felt much better doing that from the broadcast hub at the football stadium. I had done enough basketball games at that point remotely that I had a comfort level with the venue I was doing them from. And I said, okay, we'll try this in football because it's the best way to make sure that both teams get covered. And after I did the football game, I said never again. It was awful. It was awful. And here's why. I appreciate our friends in television helping us all out last year by giving us access to the feeds. The thing that happens, though, is those guys have their show, and we have ours. And what they feel best serves a viewing audience and what we might need to serve a listening audience are two very different things, okay? So they got to do what's best for their audience first, and we were kind of at the mercy of that when we had to take a feed. And when all you have is a program feed from television for a football game and not the big multi-display with all of the different angles, you know, it's not always easy to tell what yard line they're on. It's not always easy to tell how far the running back has moved the ball or how far a pass went immediately because the TV world zooms in and gives you a tight shot of the action once that player gets the ball in their hands. That's their job, okay? So I really battled with that in that one game, and I said it in multiple commercial breaks. I said it as soon as we finished the fourth quarter of the game and we're heading into postgame. I took the headset off, and I said, never again.
Amen.
Never. And you know, I mean, I'll go on record as saying this because I've talked to other broadcasters who are in places, and I'm thankful that Mississippi State, it's a priority, and they want us to travel. They want us to be there for the games, you know, as long as we can do it safely and as long as the student athletes and the staffs can remain safe. And I'm on board with that. But I've gone on record, you know, after talking to some other guys who are places where that's not the case, that they're still not traveling, and it's not because they don't want to. If it ever comes to that for me, I'll go do something else because that takes all the fun out of it.
You know,
as a person, I'm willing to accept the risk and the responsibility personally to go and do these things, you know, in a pandemic or whatever. It doesn't bother me. I don't think about it. I'm just going to work. That's what I think about. And the day that they tell me that I can't go to work and do those things and I just need to go do something else is kind of how I look at it.
No, I couldn't agree with you any more than that. I mean, last year during football, and let me say on record here, LSU, just like Mississippi State, has radio as a priority. They had worked to make sure we could travel, and last year for football we did. We traveled separately, and again, we had no issue with that because I much rather had been at the game. There was one game we did remotely because of contact tracing, so we did the Missouri game remotely here on campus, had the whole crew. In fact, we had Gordy Rush, our sideline reporter, was in his office downtown Baton Rouge. We had Doug Morrow over here to my left in the vocal booth at our studio, and I was actually down with the spotter and stat guy, Patrick Wright and Jim Nickel, in the conference room on the third floor. So not only were we remotely from the game in Columbia, but we were remotely from each other as far as those interacting. And I said it then. I said, guys, you know, we're at the mercy of what the producer wants to put on the screen, which we were thankful we got that feed, but it's just not the same. And then, of course, when we had to go into basketball and do it for the entire season, again, completely understood why. It's just basketball. I mean, there's so much, you know, we're down there on the floor in most cases. And when, you know, television goes to timeout, the action doesn't stop. I mean, there's a lot of things going on with the coaching staff. You get a sense of what they're discussing in the huddle. There's conversations between the coaches and the officials of the game. I mean, there's so much that's still happening. Then, of course, TV, as you said, has the luxury of coming back in and replaying that stuff. During the timeout, here's what Coach Will Wade did. Well, we see that, and we can relay that. But when we're, you know, back here, we're at the mercy of if they go back and show us that. So And then, of course, with all the replay and review now, you talk about being in the dark for a long period of time and cannot relay that information to the listener because we literally are, depending on what they're showing us and depending on what we know, that's all we can do. So I'm with you at 100%. The other thing that I wanted to talk about today and spend some time talking about is, in 2019, you were nice enough to join me for the first year of Hearing Voices. And we talked a little bit about the fact that we're similar in a lot of ways. You grew up in a small town in East Tennessee. I grew up in a small town in Eastern Kentucky. So I'm sure maybe not the first play-by-play announcer, but probably the most you heard from one play-by-play announcer was John Ward at Tennessee. For me, it was Kaywood Ledford at the University of Kentucky. And then, of course, because we love this career and probably followed it more astutely than other people our age, we were able to hear other people. Woody Durham, Jim Phillips at Clemson, Bob Fulton at South Carolina. There's a whole list of them. And last week it comes out that the great programmers at the SEC Network going to have a storied, and they're going to honor the great voices in our conference. And as I say all the time, the great voices of this business and the history of this business. I know you're excited about it. I'm excited to see it when it comes out here in, pretty soon, the end of the month.
Yeah, I think it's a week from Sunday as you and I, it's coming Sunday as you and I sit down and talk, for this program. And, I'm excited about it. I was excited to hear when the concept was initially pitched to the folks at the network, and when the production crew, Don Lepore, Sean Silva, who a lot of people in the country music industry will know, Sean's produced a lot of really great music videos in his career, and of course Kenny Chesney, East Tennessean, who's behind it. You live under a rock if you don't know who Kenny is, but Kenny has a similar experience, I think, based on what I've read, in that he grew up a Tennessee fan there in Knox County and listened to John Ward a lot and saw an opportunity here to get something into the mainstream about John. And then as you begin to understand who John Ward was from that perspective, you knew his importance at Tennessee. You also understood the importance of Larry Munson at Georgia. You understood the importance of Jack Crystal at Mississippi State, who was here 58 years. 58 years, You understand Eli Gold at Alabama, John Forney before him. Mick Huber's been at Florida for a long time. Dave Kellum's been at Ole Miss for a long time. You had Jim Hawthorne before you at LSU, and of course the great John Ferguson before Jim. And then at Auburn you had Jim Fife, another Kentucky guy from Paintsville, and then you had Rod Bramlett, who we tragically lost far too soon a couple of years ago, and now Andy Burcham. So, they're all part of the fabric of this conference. And keep in mind, we're not that far removed, Chris, from a time when every football game in this league was not on television. In my lifetime, that was the case. I listened to John Ward growing up in Tennessee because if you were lucky when I first started following football, 1989, 1990, when it kind of became something that was in my realm of consciousness, you were lucky if you saw Tennessee on TV maybe 3 times a year. And that was more than what my parents would have seen them on TV when they were younger. They might have saw them on TV 1 time a year. So the radio guys were super important in not only building the brand of their athletic departmts, but they were important in building the popularity and the fabric of SEC football. And in another extent, Kaywood Ledford's a guy that gets a lot of credit as a basketball announcer. Kaywood was a great football announcer for people who've never listened to him. And he and others helped kind of build the fabric of SEC basketball as well. So I think it's great that these older guys are getting their due. There are people of a certain age who have always known their greatness, and now hopefully there's a whole new generation of people who will be introduced to that and they'll be able to understand what people like you and I are talking about when we reference some of that stuff, because it's an important part of the history of what we do.
No doubt about it. So just a reminder, as Neil said, it's the 11th. It's the premiere of the 11th season of SEC Storied, and it will debut kicking off with More Than a Voice coming up on Sunday, September 26th. So I know I'll be watching it. Neil will be watching it. I think you'll get a kick out of it too. So look for that coming up. Real quick before I transition and get ready to wrap things up, you and I both hold all of those gentlemen that you talked about, even those that we work with today, some of our colleagues in the league, in high regard. And in many ways, carry ourselves, or at least try to carry ourselves, in the same way they did, because we respected them so much. How do you think, in your opinion, what is the role now of the school voice? I mean, again, as you pointed out, every SEC team virtually is either on streaming or on television, so the mass audience gets the games through television. But for me, I think technology now has almost, there was kind of a lull where TV was here, the radio guy was kind of separate, the broadcast was if you were in the car. But now technology, being able to sync games, being able to listen to the guys who know your players, know your coaches, know some of the stories that the TV guys just don't get with one visit prior to the game. How do you think that role is changed? Is it as important or not as important? I mean, how do you look at it in 2021?
In the Southeastern Conference, I think even in the ACC, because you're talking about the South, this role is still important. It's still very relevant. I think at a place like Mississippi State, where you're talking about being a program in a rural state, there aren't a lot of major population hubs in this state. It's important because it's a way to reach the fan base. I'm not saying people don't have some kind of cable or streaming service to watch the games. I just think they grew up listening to Jack Crystal. They grew up consuming radio, and it's just tradition within their family. This is what they do. I think you're spot on when you talk about the amount of access that many of us are given within our program. And we work to earn trust with the coaches. We work to earn trust with the student athletes. They see us at practice a little bit more. I've had people in this industry higher up the ladder who can't understand why it's an important part of our jobs to go to practice. What do you need to go to practice for? Why do you need to waste 2 hours out there? Well, it's not a waste of time because it helps in preparation, number one. Number two, I'm not going to pretend that any coach I've worked with is walking out on the field looking on the sideline to see if I'm there that day. But I'd like to think if they do glance over there and they see that I'm there and they know that I don't need a thing from them on that day, I'm just there to watch their team, to try to be informed, and to in some way show maybe a little bit of moral support by saying, hey, I'm here, I'm your guy. That means a little something to them. I haven't always been able to do that here because of, other circumstances. I can do it now, and I think that's important. It shouldn't be a transactional relationship. Doesn't mean you have to be best friends with the people that you cover, and I don't know that you should be, to be honest with you. But it doesn't need to be transactional. That's not a way to build trust with anyone. So I think that part is very important, and I don't know that television can give you that in one visit or in the course of 2 or 3 visits within a year if they see the same team. I would say this too, not so much from the CBS perspective, and I think those guys are the gold standard in terms of how they've covered our league. I'm sad to see them go away.
Absolutely.
I think Brad, Gary, Byrne before Brad, Jamie, everyone who's been a part of that has been fantastic. But I think that we're in an age now with TV where there's a focus that's more on entertainment than there is on what's happening between the lines sometimes too. And it's not why I watch. I'll tell you that. I watch because I want to see the people on the field and I want to know about them. And there are crews that do a really good job of that. But there are some, too, that you watch it, and a lot of it's producer-driven, I think, but you watch it, and it's just like, what are we doing? So we don't have time to do those things.
No, we don't.
We are informative, first and foremost, because that's our job. Time, score, down, distance. As Judy Noble told Jack Crystal here in 1953, tell the radio audience the score, tell them who's got the ball, tell them how much time's left, cut out the bull. Okay, that's why we're here. And I hope I'm hitting that mark here. I know you're hitting it for the people at LSU and across Louisiana, and I feel like our contemporaries are doing a really good job of that at their schools as well. But no, I think it's still relevant in this part of the country. Is that the same for some of the smaller leagues where you have the major metropolitan areas and there's more competition? I don't know. I can't answer that question. But I do think in the rural areas in the South, I think even in the Big Ten, in the Midwestern areas where it's always been tradition to turn that radio on Saturday, I think it's still very important.
I get asked a lot. How many people do you think listen to LSU games? And I said, well, it's hard to tell. It's several stations, many stations across the state. They're streaming. I said, but I do know this. If suddenly I drop an expletive on the air, it probably won't take long for my Twitter, Facebook, and email inbox to fill up awfully quickly. And to your point, I told Coach O this 2 weeks ago on his weekly radio show, and I think you've heard me say it before. I've always looked at our job because we're with the school, because we wear the colors and the logos, is, my job's in a lot of ways P.T. Barnum more than Edward R. Murrow. And from a coach's standpoint, I think that's how you help build that trust. I'm not here to go to practice to let everybody know somebody's not playing or he's going to play or this guy's going to do the wildcat. That's not why I'm there. It's to be prepared when that happens on the field, that it doesn't take me by surprise. So then I can relay that to the audience. So because they probably are surprised, but we can talk about the fact that, that's something the team has worked on. You don't say it ahead of time. You say it when it happens, but at least you're prepared. I know you have a great relationship as we wrap up with our friend and great broadcaster, Neil Price. Big fan of his. I'll listen whenever I'm not doing a game and I can get him on stream or on satellite radio. So I am a big fan, been a big fan for a long time. But I know you got a great relationship now with Coach Mike Leach. And as we wrap up today, everybody loves Mike Leach. Now, on Saturday, LSU fans are going to be wanting to beat his eyes in. And they were wanting to beat his eyes in last year, before and after the game. But I think there is a love, and I put that in quotes, for just the freshness that Coach Leach brings to college football. For you, working with him personally, it's got to be fun. You got to have a great time, probably because you never know what's going to come out of his mouth next.
Yeah, I have really enjoyed it. And what I love about working with him is the candor. He will answer whatever you ask him, and he will answer whatever fans ask him. And I think, too, he has been incredibly accessible to the fan base here. I sit with him on Thursday nights, and the radio shows this year are being done on a stage. They block a street off downtown. They put some tables out for people to go and pick up food from any of those restaurants on Main Street and come down there and hang out and eat and watch the show. And it also gives them a chance to walk up and shake hands with him and make pictures and get autographs. And not once has he looked like he has been bothered or upset by any of that. And he will actually engage those people who come up and talk to him and ask them questions about their backgrounds and where they're from. And I think that's wonderful, because there's this perception, and sometimes it's more than that, sometimes it's fact, that these are larger-than-life individuals. They're not normal people. And he just doesn't give off that air at all. He comes across as a very genuine person. I give you a great example from our post-game interview this past week at Memphis. Okay, so they lost a close game where they didn't play very well in the second half and had some things happen that all that's been well documented, from the league office since too. But I'm in the locker room with him after the game, and he's, sure, he's disappointed that the team lost, but he's not too high or too low. He's kind of even keeled. And we get to the end of the interview, and the last question I asked him, I said, you're dealing with young guys. I said, you're going to have peaks and valleys. There's going to be a lot of inconsistency. We've talked about that a lot in the first 3 games. I said, as a coach, how do you deal with that? And he leans back and he goes, well, I swear a lot, behind their back, obviously, but I swear a lot. And then I go out on the field and I try to encourage them and build them up, and I think that's an honest answer. Yeah. I really do. I mean, I think that's a true. I don't know that I can envision many other coaches who would just be that honest with you. Yeah, I swear a lot. That's how I deal with it. And then on the other end of that, my wife and I went to Yellowstone back in May on vacation. Well, he's from Wyoming, so 2 weeks after the spring game, we're going on this trip. So I go out to spring practice, and we're going to do his spring interview. And I said, hey, Coach, I don't want to bother you, but I said, I'm going to Yellowstone in 2 weeks, and I'd really like to pick your brain. What do I need to see? I'm going to have a car. I'm going to be able to drive around Wyoming and Montana. What do I need to see while I'm there? And it turns into this wonderful hour and 10-minute conversation about all these great places that starts with, well, the first thing you want to do is stay away from the bear, okay? Because the bear's been asleep for 5 months. It's just going to be waking up when you get there. And, you're kind of a big guy, and it doesn't know what you are, but you might taste good. So stay away from the bear, okay? And from there it turns into you're going to eat a lot of red meat. They don't have many green vegetables out there. That's just kind of decoration on the plate. Don't worry about that. Your cholesterol will be up a little when you come back, but you'll be happy. All these things that, it was just great. And I mean, we got to see a good many of those things, not all of them in 7 days, but we got to see a good many of them. And I'm just thinking, here's Mike Leach, tour guide.
Yeah.
That's, kicked in helping you with this. And we didn't know one another very well, because we just hadn't been around one another because of COVID. In 2020, we weren't around one another all that much. And he's been great. He's really has. I've been fortunate here. It's not just him. I mean, every coach I've worked with since I've been here. Football, Ben Howland and basketball has been kind of the constant for me since I've been here. Those guys are all wonderful. Great people.
It's fantastic. And, again, I think there's Tiger fans won't feel that way coming up Saturday morning. But once that's all said and done, they still will be watching to see what Coach Leach says next. Our final moments here. 2 teams coming in, Neil, 2-1 to this matchup. Obviously, Alabama expected to be the front runner in the SEC West. Outside of that, you could pretty much go down the list, and there's a lot of questions for every team. Like, who's going to make a push towards the top of the SEC West? As I said, tough games. 35-34, you get the win at home over Louisiana Tech. You get a solid win over NC State 24-10, and then some unfortunate things on the road against Memphis this past Saturday. In a capsule, going into this SEC opener, real quickly, what do we know about Mississippi State through 3 games in 2021?
We know that they're young and they're still inconsistent. It's that simple. And Coach Leach has said that, to a degree after each game, including that game against NC State, which is probably start to finish the best game that they've played. Okay, they got better, but there's still another level they can get to. We've seen flashes of it. When they get down, even though they're playing a lot of freshmen and sophomores, they keep fighting. They play with great effort, but that effort and execution don't always meet, and that's the challenge. They've got to get the effort and the execution to mesh. When they do that, I think this team has a high ceiling, but easier said than done. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, against LSU on Saturday is can you get the effort and the execution to consistently come together against a team full of really talented athletes. If you can, it's got a chance to be a really good game. If you have those inconsistencies and you dig yourself a hole again, I think when you get in the SEC, you're going to find that it's tougher to dig out of those holes than it is when you're playing a non-conference game. So hopefully they learn something from that against Memphis and against Louisiana Tech, and they can find a way to play better now as they start the conference season Saturday.
Well, I know one thing. Tiger fans certainly have revenge on their mind, but Coach O has spent, really all season, preseason, when asked about it. Hey, it's another team. We're another team. It's another season. It'll come down to who executes, to your point, coming up on Saturday. And LSU certainly knows, with enough veterans on this squad, that going to Starkville in that atmosphere is never, ever easy. Neil, it is great to see you, buddy, and I can't wait to see you in person. It's going to be the first time in quite a while to shake your hand or fist bump or whatever they do up there in Starkville. But looking forward to seeing you on Saturday morning. Looking forward to another great SEC game. And can't thank you enough, my friend, for taking time out to join us.
Glad to do it. Look forward to seeing you Saturday.
All right, everybody. Neil Price, voice of the Mississippi State Bulldogs. He's been our guest this week on Hearing Voices. Don't forget, all you got to do is subscribe. And every time one drops, as the kids say, you'll have it right there in your favorite mobile device. So we hope you'll do that. You can find it also at lsusports.net/podcasts, along with all kinds of podcasts that LSU produces throughout the week. My thanks to Neil Price for stopping by. My thanks to you for coming by and enjoying our show. And we hope we'll have you back here next week. Until then, this is Chris Blair saying so long, everybody. Still hearing voices.
Voices is a production of LSU-SP and Playfly Sports. Hit the subscribe button now and never miss a new episode. You can follow Chris at LSU Tigers Voice. The LSU Sports Radio Network, a division of LSU-SP and Playfly Sports.